There are seasons when life begins pressing on you from every angle, and you start to wonder if something is wrong. But what if the pressure you feel isn't punishment at all? What if the heaviness settling on your shoulders is a divine signal that something within you is expanding? Sometimes the weight doesn't fall on you to break you. It falls to stretch you, to awaken something inside you that you didn't even know was there. Heaviness can be the first whisper that your spirit is outgrowing the shell it lived in for years. God often begins transformation long before you have language for it. You can feel yourself changing even when you don't fully understand why. Places that once felt comfortable begin to feel tight. Relationships you settled into start revealing cracks you didn't see before. Dreams you once buried come back to the surface, knocking at the door of your heart with a persistence you can't ignore. It's as if your inner world is being pulled into a new direction, even while your outer world hasn't shifted yet. But here's the quiet truth. When God is preparing to elevate you, He rarely announces it with clarity. Instead, the first sign is usually heaviness, an invisible weight that makes you pay attention, not the kind that destroys, but the kind that interrupts you. The kind that makes you pause and ask, what is happening to me? That heaviness is an invitation into awareness. Something inside you is stretching, making room for the next version of you that God is forming. We often mistake heaviness for failure or opposition, but in the kingdom, heaviness is usually the mark of growth. Growth is uncomfortable. Growth disrupts. Growth stretches a person beyond old patterns, old limitations, and old versions of themselves. A seed buried in the ground doesn't come to life without pressure. First it breaks, then it roots, then it rises. Everything beautiful begins under weight. Likewise, God allows the soil of your life to press down because something within you is maturing. You may not see the transformation yet, but something sacred is forming beneath the surface. The heaviness you feel is strengthening your spirit to carry the future He has prepared for you. Heaviness doesn't always come through dramatic circumstances. Sometimes it comes through people drifting away, sometimes through opportunities drying up, sometimes through responsibilities that seem bigger than your strength. Sometimes it shows up in the quiet hours when you feel drained for no obvious reason. And while these moments feel unsettling, they aren't signs that God is far away. They're proof that He's close, guiding you into a new identity. He trusts you with more than before. He trusts you to grow beyond who you were. He trusts you to listen deeper, walk wiser, and discern with greater clarity. Divine elevation doesn't begin with open doors. It begins with internal expansion. God grows your capacity before He grows your platform. Elevation is His way of saying, I'm lifting you, but heaviness is His way of saying, I'm strengthening you to stand where I'm taking you. There is no promotion without preparation, and preparation often comes dressed as pressure. When God shifts you into a new life, He disrupts your comfort first. He shakes loose the habits and cycles that the old version of you depended on. He exposes everything you carried that can't travel with you into the next chapter. Heaviness has a purpose. It reveals what must be surrendered. There are moments when the heaviness feels emotional. You find yourself crying without knowing why. Thoughts you pushed down start rising. Old wounds reopen. The things you could ignore for years suddenly demand your attention. But this emotional eruption is not a setback, it's a cleansing. God doesn't elevate what you refuse to acknowledge. He brings it all to the surface so you can heal it, release it, and rise above it. When you start feeling everything deeply, it's easy to assume you're falling apart, but in reality, you're falling into alignment. What feels like unraveling is actually refining. You're shedding old layers the way a growing body sheds what no longer fits. There comes a point when your old strength stops working. Conversations that once entertained you now drain you. What used to be enjoyable now feels empty. What used to be tolerable now irritates your soul. That's the weight of transition. God is shifting the chapter even if you're still standing on the last page. Heaviness is also God's way of increasing your stamina. If He gave you everything you've been asking for without strengthening you first, the blessings would overwhelm you. So He uses pressure to train you, just like resistance builds muscle. Pressure teaches you discipline. Pressure sharpens your discernment. Pressure matures your emotions. Pressure deepens your spiritual awareness. Pressure grows your ability to endure without breaking. These aren't punishments, they're preparations. Heaviness forces you to lean into God, to pray differently, to listen differently, to depend on Him in ways you never did before. Pressure creates intimacy with Him. And in that intimacy, He reveals the parts of you that were hidden even from yourself. You discover courage you never tapped into, strength you never acknowledged, wisdom you didn't know was there, a calling that was always inside you waiting for permission to emerge. If God intended for you to stay the same, your life would remain predictable. But because He is elevating you, He allows weight, not to break you, but to build you, not to punish you, but to prepare you. The heaviness you feel right now is holy evidence that God is trusting you with greater purpose. Even when life feels heavy, you are not being buried, you are being planted. Something inside you is rising, and what feels heavy today is preparing you for a strength you've never carried before. There comes a point in your journey with God when you begin to realize that the heaviness you feel is connected to who you are becoming, not what you are losing. Transition feels messy because your spirit recognizes the future before your mind does. There's a tug happening inside you, a stretching that refuses to let you shrink into versions of yourself that no longer match your calling. And while that stretching can feel like pressure, it's actually your soul aligning itself with divine direction. One of the first signs that God is reorganizing your life is when old patterns start irritating you. The conversations you once entertained now feel draining. The habits that comforted you before no longer satisfy. The environments that once felt normal now feel too small. That discomfort is not a sign of failure. It is evidence of growth. When people say you've changed, what they really mean is that your spirit has outgrown the expectations they once placed on you. Growth rarely announces itself with clarity. Most of the time it begins with restlessness, a feeling that something inside you is shifting even though nothing around you seems different. You begin to desire deeper connections, clearer vision, and more intentional living. You can no longer tolerate what steals your peace or confuses your soul. The old version of you would accept anything for the sake of keeping the peace. But the emerging version of you is learning to protect your peace instead of sacrificing it. God begins to refine your mindset before He refines your circumstances. He strengthens your discernment before He strengthens your platform. You start noticing things you used to ignore. You see through behaviors you once excused. You respond with calm where you used to react with chaos. That's not just growth, it's maturity. God is pruning you, shaping you, elevating you even before others recognize it. Sometimes elevation requires separation. Not because people are bad, but because their presence no longer supports your next level. God will remove certain voices not to isolate you but to clarify you. He knows how easily your identity can be influenced by the expectations of others. And when He wants to rebuild you, He clears the noise so you can finally hear your own soul. There are moments where it feels like God is allowing things to fall apart. The relationships that once defined you start slipping. The opportunities you depended on begin to fade. The plans you built with so much pride suddenly stop working. But what feels like collapse is often divine alignment. God lets the wrong things fail so the right things can stand. He knows what you truly need, even when your emotions resist the shift. As God rebuilds you internally, He also teaches you to honor your emotions without being ruled by them. Emotions are indicators, not dictators. You're learning to feel deeply without making impulsive decisions. You're learning to pause before you react. You're learning to ask yourself, is this moment speaking to who I am now? or who I used to be. Emotional maturity is not about suppressing feelings, it's about interpreting them correctly. You are recognizing that not every emotional spike requires a response, not every provocation needs to be addressed. Not every disagreement deserves your energy. Some situations are invitations to chaos disguised as conversations. The you that God is building knows how to walk away without guilt, knows how to stay grounded even when others attempt to pull you into dysfunction. Your peace is becoming a priority. You're no longer willing to trade it for approval, validation, or temporary excitement. You understand now that anything costing you your peace is too expensive. If someone constantly drains your spirit, you're allowed to step back. If a situation repeatedly confuses your soul, you're allowed to let it go. Peace is not weakness, it is wisdom. It is a sign that you have learned to value your emotional well-being and spiritual alignment. God is also teaching you to stop apologizing for your growth. You don't need to shrink so others feel comfortable. You don't need to hide your transformation because someone preferred the older version of you. You don't need to silence your voice because someone is intimidated by your healing. Growth will challenge people who benefit from your brokenness, but you are no longer responsible for managing anyone's insecurity. This is the season where your spirit starts recognizing what deserves your presence and what does not. You begin choosing your company wisely. You begin speaking with intention. You begin creating boundaries that protect your soul rather than burden it. And even though these shifts may confuse others, they bring clarity to your journey. Another sign of inner expansion is the increasing awareness of your purpose. You sense that God has placed something inside you that can no longer remain dormant. Ideas begin stirring, dreams you buried start resurfacing, vision becomes sharper, desire becomes louder, opportunity begins aligning itself with your identity. You start realizing that what you thought was ordinary inside you has been extraordinary all along. But before purpose can fully emerge, discipline must rise. God is not simply giving you dreams, He is giving you structure. He is organizing your inner world so that when the next level arrives, you won't sabotage it with old habits. He's teaching you consistency. He's teaching you patience. He's teaching you resilience. He's teaching you how to remain strong even when the process feels slow. Stretching is uncomfortable, but it's never pointless. Every uncomfortable shift is strengthening your character. Every emotional test is fortifying your spirit. Every closed door is redirecting your steps. Every delay is cultivating endurance. Nothing is wasted. God uses everything, your pain, your pressure, your questions, your setbacks, your longing, to build the version of you that is equipped for the life He designed. You are not just being changed, you are being refined. Rebuilt, reshaped, renewed, your heart is learning to trust again. Your mind is learning to rest again. Your soul is learning to breathe again. What felt like heaviness in the beginning is now beginning to feel like clarity. What once felt confusing now feels intentional. What once felt like loss now feels like alignment. You are stepping into a version of yourself that can no longer be confined by old wounds or outdated expectations. You are rising with a sharper mind, a stronger spirit, and a clearer sense of who you are in God. This is your evolution. This is your unfolding. This is your emergence. Something powerful is being built within you, and soon it will be visible on the outside. Something inside you is awakening in a way that can't be reversed, and the next shift God brings will reveal just how much you've grown. There comes a stage in your spiritual development when God begins exposing the patterns that have been silently shaping your life. Not to shame you, but to free you. For years you may have carried habits that felt normal because they were familiar. Habits that once helped you survive are now standing in the way of who you're becoming. And the deeper God pulls you, the more clearly you begin to see those old reflexes for what they truly are, leftovers from a version of you that no longer exists. One of the loudest patterns God begins to correct is emotional overload. When you've lived through trauma, disappointment, or instability, it's easy to confuse emotional intensity with emotional truth. But intensity doesn't always represent reality. Sometimes your emotions are replaying an old scene even though you're standing in a new season. And God begins highlighting that not to embarrass you, but to liberate you. There are moments when emotions rise quickly, not because of what's happening in front of you, but because of what happened years ago. Someone's tone triggers a wound you never processed. Someone's silence awakens a fear you thought you outgrew. Someone's inconsistency creates anxiety you can't even explain, and you think you're reacting to the present, but you're reacting to the past still echoing inside you. God brings awareness to these patterns because He wants to loosen the grip your history has on your future. You are not meant to keep reliving the same emotional cycles. Your spirit is ready for freedom, but freedom requires self-recognition. You cannot conquer what you refuse to acknowledge. The moment you recognize a pattern is the moment God can begin healing it. Another habit God highlights is the instinct to internalize everything. You take people's moods personally. You absorb the emotions in the room. You carry guilt that doesn't belong to you. You overthink simple interactions until they start feeling like accusations. You replay conversations over and over again, analyzing every word, every pause, every expression. But internalizing is not discernment. Internalizing is emotional exhaustion disguised as responsibility. You were never meant to carry the weight of everyone's tone, reactions, or behavior. People's emotions are not mirrors of your worth. Their attitudes are not evaluations of your identity. Their inconsistency does not reflect your value. God is teaching you how to live from the inside out instead of allowing the outside world to rewrite your internal narrative. You are learning that you don't have to hold everything, you don't have to explain everything, you don't have to assign meaning to every shift in the atmosphere. Sometimes people are dealing with their own internal storms, and you just happen to be nearby. Their chaos is not your calling, their struggle is not your assignment, their energy is not your identity. This is emotional freedom. Another pattern God begins to strip away is the need to beat the strong one, the one who never breaks, the one who solves everything, the one who absorbs pain quietly, the one who pretends they're fine because they don't want to be a burden. You may have learned to equate strength with silence. But God reveals that true strength is not pretending you're okay. True strength is allowing yourself to heal. Healing requires honesty. Healing requires vulnerability. Healing requires acknowledging what hurt you, what drained you, what broke you, and what shaped you. You can't heal what you hide. You can't process what you suppress, and you can't move forward while dragging unspoken pain behind you. God isn't trying to turn you into someone who falls apart. He's trying to turn you into someone who no longer carries invisible wounds into every new season. Another destructive habit God begins confronting is the tendency to overextend yourself. You pour into others until you're empty. You show up for everyone even when you have nothing left to give. You think being a good person means being endlessly available. But availability without boundaries is self-abandonment. You cannot heal while constantly prioritizing everyone else's comfort. You cannot grow while continuously sacrificing your emotional needs. You cannot elevate while drowning in responsibilities you were never meant to carry. God is teaching you that peace is a boundary, joy is a boundary, rest is a boundary, silence is a boundary, and boundaries don't make you cold. They make you wise. Another pattern God exposes is avoidance. You avoid difficult conversations, you avoid conflict, you avoid your own emotions, you avoid asking for help, you avoid saying no because you fear being misunderstood, but avoidance is just delayed pain. And the longer pain is delayed, the deeper it roots itself. God is calling you toward courage, not to create confrontation, but to create clarity. Conversations you avoid don't disappear, they grow. Pain you ignore doesn't leave, it hides. Boundaries you refuse to set eventually become resentment. Courage clears the air so your spirit can breathe again. As these patterns are revealed, it may feel overwhelming. You might start thinking, "Am I broken? Why is God uncovering so much?" But you are not broken. You are being remodeled. You are not falling apart. You are being reorganized. You are not being exposed to shame. You are being exposed to truth so you can step into freedom. God never reveals to humiliate, He reveals to heal. The more He highlights, the more He wants to restore. The more He uncovers, the more He intends to rebuild. Everything He is showing you is connected to where He is taking you. The emotional patterns that kept you stuck before cannot follow you into the future He designed. He is preparing you for relationships with more depth, for assignments with more responsibility, for influence with more impact, for environments that require emotional discipline, not emotional chaos. Each habit you release creates space for peace. Each pattern you break creates space for purpose. Each emotional shift creates space for clarity. Each moment of awareness becomes a step toward the version of you that God has always seen. This season is not about perfection. It's about awakening. It's about realizing you don't have to be ruled by the emotions that once governed your life. It's about recognizing your triggers without surrendering to them. It's about understanding your patterns so you can dismantle them. It's about partnering with God while He rewrites the script of your emotional world. You are not just learning, you are transforming. You are not just healing, you are evolving. You are not just growing, you are becoming. Something powerful is taking shape inside you, something wiser, something stronger, something more intentional. Something more aligned, and the beauty of it is this: once you see these patterns clearly, you can never go back to the version of yourself who lived unaware. You're stepping into a clarity that old wounds can no longer confuse, and what God develops next will elevate every part of your journey. There comes a moment in your growth where God begins reshaping how you handle emotional pressure. He doesn't just change what you feel, He changes how you respond, how you interpret, and how you move through moments that once overwhelmed you. Growth is not tested in peaceful seasons. Growth is revealed when life becomes loud, when stress rises, when expectations collide with exhaustion, when your heart feels pulled in directions your mind can't organize. It is in these moments God teaches you the art of emotional stability, not instability disguised as control, not suppression disguised as strength, but genuine, anchored stability that refuses to let temporary feelings rewrite eternal truths. This is the stage where God begins to mature your emotional reflexes, because He knows your purpose requires a version of you who can stand steady even when everything around you is shifting. One of the first lessons God teaches in this stage is the power of restraint. Restraint is not weakness, restraint is clarity. Restraint says, "I don't have to respond to everything I feel." Restraint says, "My peace is too valuable to hand over in a moment of frustration." Restraint is spiritual discipline measured in silence, patience, and pause. There are days when your emotions rise fast, and your old reflex would have reacted instantly, maybe with anger, maybe with defensiveness, maybe with withdrawal, but something in you is shifting. You've begun practicing the pause, breathing before speaking, thinking before responding, observing before concluding. This pause doesn't erase your feelings, it elevates your thinking. It reminds you that not every emotion deserves authority, and not every moment deserves energy. God is teaching you that maturity is not the absence of emotion. It is the management of emotion. You feel deeply, but you move wisely. You get triggered, but you remain grounded. You get disappointed, but you stay aligned. You experience pressure, but you don't crumble. This is emotional growth. Another layer of emotional maturity is learning to stop treating every challenge like a catastrophe. When you have lived through instability or pain, your mind can be trained to expect the worst. You start interpreting inconvenience as danger, silence as rejection, or tension as a sign that everything is falling apart. But God is retraining your perspective. He is teaching you that not every storm is a threat. Some storms are simply weather. You can learn to walk through discomfort without assuming disaster. Your mind is learning to challenge the lies that fear whispers. You're starting to catch yourself in moments of exaggeration. You're starting to realize that every uneasy feeling is not a prophecy of doom. Sometimes it's just a sign that you're human. You're learning that a bad moment does not equal a bad future. A difficult interaction does not define your worth. An unmet expectation does not collapse your identity. You are gaining the spiritual maturity to put moments in their proper place. Another transformative lesson in this season is understanding emotional responsibility. Emotional responsibility means you stop expecting other people to regulate what only God can heal. When you rely on others to soothe every insecurity, you end up disappointed because people were never designed to fill spiritual voids. Emotional responsibility is the quiet decision to take ownership of your reactions, your triggers, and your healing. It means you stop blaming others for the pattern you refuse to break. It means you stop expecting apologies from people incapable of giving them. It means you stop looking for validation from people who can't see your identity. It means you stop waiting for perfect circumstances to feel whole. God is teaching you to stand on ground that is stable even when the world around you is unpredictable. Emotional responsibility also means giving yourself compassion. You cannot grow while constantly criticizing yourself. You cannot heal while punishing your heart for feeling too much or too deeply. You cannot expand while replaying old mistakes and labeling yourself unworthy. God is teaching you how to speak to yourself with the same grace you give others. This is the season where you learn to say, I am still growing. I am allowed to start again. I am not defined by my reactions. I am not trapped in who I used to be. You're learning to approach your healing with patience, not pressure. Another critical shift happening within you is the understanding that peace does not require perfection. Peace requires boundaries. You cannot experience emotional stability while allowing unstable people unlimited access to you. You cannot grow while constantly entertaining conversations that drain your strength. You cannot mature while staying connected to environments that feed your anxiety. God is teaching you the importance of emotional distance, not distance that comes from bitterness, but distance that comes from wisdom. You can love people and still limit their access. You can care deeply and still protect your spirit. You can support others without sacrificing your sanity, and you can show compassion without allowing someone to continually pull you into cycles you are trying to break. Boundaries are the doorway to emotional peace. In this phase, God also teaches you how to sit with discomfort instead of running from it. Running from discomfort creates emotional immaturity. Sitting with discomfort builds emotional resilience. Some feelings are meant to be felt, not feared. Anxiety doesn't always require escape. Sadness doesn't always require distraction. Confusion doesn't always require control. When you learn to sit with your emotions without becoming them, you discover a new layer of strength. You realize you can feel pain without falling apart. You can feel disappointment without giving up. You can feel fear without surrendering to it. This is the emotional stamina God develops inside of you, the ability to endure without being consumed. Another sign of emotional growth is developing spiritual memory. You stop forgetting what God has brought you through. You stop letting fear drown out the evidence of God's faithfulness. You stop reacting as if you've never survived before. Your memory becomes your anchor. Your testimony becomes your stability. Every time fear rises, your spirit whispers, I've been sustained before. I will be sustained again. This is how you become emotionally grounded, by remembering what God has already carried you through. And slowly, quietly, consistently, You begin noticing the change. You don't react the way you used to. You don't spiral the way you used to. You don't collapse under pressure the way you used to. You don't depend on approval the way you used to. Something in you is becoming steady, consistent, rooted. You're not becoming emotionless. You're becoming emotionally disciplined. You're not becoming distant. You're becoming intentional. You're not becoming cold. You're becoming wise. This is God shaping the version of you that can carry destiny without cracking under pressure. The version of you who can walk into any room with calm authority. The version of you who knows who they are even when life gets unpredictable. You are rising in emotional maturity, and nothing about this transformation is accidental. God is cultivating a strength in you that life can no longer shake. What God is refining inside you now is building a strength that will carry you with confidence into every season ahead. There comes a point in your evolution where God begins teaching you the sacred discipline of protecting your peace. Not the fragile kind of peace that disappears when things get complicated, but the deep-rooted, spiritual kind of peace that holds you steady when everything around you tries to pull you off course. The peace God is building in you is not passive. It is powerful. It is intentional. It is guarded. It is a form of spiritual wisdom. Peace is not the absence of problems. Peace is the presence of stability. Peace is the ability to stay grounded when your world feels uncertain. Peace is the choice to breathe deeply when pressure rises. Peace is the refusal to let someone else's chaos become your internal environment. Peace is what happens when the Holy Spirit becomes your anchor instead of your emotions. But protecting your peace requires awareness. You cannot protect what you haven't identified. You lose peace every time you ignore the signals of your own spirit. When you allow conversations that drain you, when you hold onto relationships that diminish you, when you give time to things that don't grow you, you are trading your peace for exhaustion, and God is teaching you to stop making trades that rob your soul. One of the first steps to protecting your peace is learning the art of saying no, and not a hesitant no, not a guilty no, not a shaky no, but a confident, grounded, spiritually aligned no. You are allowed to decline things that disrupt your clarity. You are allowed to walk away from environments that steal your energy. You are allowed to protect your emotional space without offering lengthy explanations. No is a boundary. No is a shield. No is self-respect. No is wisdom. God is teaching you that pleasing people is not the same as living in purpose. You cannot fulfill your calling when you're drowning in commitments that do not belong to you. Your yes must be intentional. Your yes must be aligned. Your yes must be holy. And sometimes the only way to honor God is to honor your boundaries. Another layer of protecting your peace is understanding that not everyone deserves access to your inner world. Your spirit is not a public playground. Your emotions are not open territory for uninvolved opinions. Your heart is not meant to be handled by people who lack care. You can love people deeply and still protect your emotional health. Access is earned through consistency, not granted through history. Someone knowing you for years does not mean they know how to care for your soul. Someone being close to you does not mean they are safe for you. Someone sharing a past with you does not mean they belong in your future. God is teaching you to evaluate people based on alignment, not attachment. Protecting your peace also requires breaking the habit of emotional overcommitment. You cannot carry the world on your shoulders. You cannot solve everyone's issues. You cannot fix what God never assigned to you. Some people come to you for help, not because you're the right person for the job, but because you've always been the one who said yes. But availability without boundaries becomes emotional slavery. You are not responsible for regulating someone else's storms. You are not required to absorb their stress. You are not obligated to rescue adults who refuse to take responsibility for their choices. You can support without sacrificing yourself. You can care without collapsing. You can be present without being drained. Another powerful lesson in protecting your peace is learning to let go of closure. Closure is not a conversation. Closure is not an explanation. Closure is not someone apologizing the way you imagined. Closure is accepting that God saw everything you didn't, and He ended what was quietly destroying your spirit. Some doors closed because peace was waiting behind the next one. Some relationships ended because your heart needed space to breathe. Some people walked away because their presence was blocking your healing. Some opportunities slipped because they weren't aligned with your destiny. If God removes something, He is not punishing you. He is protecting you. Protecting your peace also requires mastering the gift of silence. Silence is not weakness, it is strategy. There are moments where the most powerful response is no response. There are situations where speaking would cost you your peace. There are conversations that deserve your silence more than your explanation. There are people who thrive off provoking your reaction, and the moment you refuse to react, you reclaim your power. Not every argument requires your voice. Not every misunderstanding needs correction. Not every accusation deserves a defense. Not every conflict is yours to settle. Sometimes silence is your greatest demonstration of maturity. God is teaching you to respond from wisdom, not wounds. When you choose silence, you choose strength over impulse. You choose clarity over chaos. You choose elevation over entanglement. Silence is the language of someone who refuses to give their peace away cheaply. Another part of protecting your peace is creating emotional space for yourself. When was the last time you checked in with your spirit? When was the last time you asked yourself how you truly felt? Not what you needed to do, not what others expected, not who needed you, but you. Your emotions need room to breathe. Your mind needs stillness to recover. Your heart needs time to reset. You cannot pour endlessly without refilling. Rest is not laziness, it is maintenance. Space is not selfish, it is survival. God is teaching you to withdraw when necessary, not to avoid people, but to reconnect with yourself. Protecting your peace also means making peace with your past. You cannot move forward while fighting ghosts that no longer exist. You cannot build a calm future on top of unresolved memories. You cannot expect peace externally when you're at war internally. Healing is a gift you give yourself. Forgiveness is freedom you offer your own soul. Forgiveness does not justify what happened. It simply releases you from carrying it. Forgiveness does not erase the memory. It removes the sting. Forgiveness does not mean they were right. It means you refuse to let them hold power over your emotions. Forgiveness creates space for peace to settle in your inner world. And as you keep protecting your peace, something remarkable begins to happen. The more you guard your spirit, the lighter you feel. The more boundaries you set, the clearer your life becomes. The more you step away from chaos, the closer you get to your calling. Peace becomes your atmosphere. Peace becomes your filter. Peace becomes your lifestyle. This peace is shaping you into someone who no longer reacts to everything, someone who no longer entertains drama, someone who no longer chases validation, someone who no longer explains their worth, someone who knows how to stay aligned even when life throws curveballs. This peace is preparing you for the greatness God is leading you into. You are not just learning peace, you are becoming peace. Your spirit is entering a calmer, clearer, stronger dimension, and what God unfolds next will flow from the peace you've learned to guard. There comes a moment in your growth when God starts confronting the habits you've lived with for so long that they almost feel like personality traits, but they're not your identity. They're reactions you learned in seasons where survival mattered more than clarity. And now that God is elevating you, He is teaching you to lay down what once protected you. You cannot carry old habits into new levels. You cannot drag familiar dysfunction into divine alignment. You cannot walk into destiny with the reflexes of a wounded heart. So God begins to deal with the habits that quietly shape your emotional life. habits that drain your peace, habits that disrupt your relationships, habits that steal your clarity, habits that sabotage your progress. And perhaps the most powerful of these habits is overreacting. Overreacting is not a character flaw. It is an alarm system built in moments when you didn't feel safe, when you felt unheard, when you felt unseen. It's the body's way of saying, I've been here before and it hurt. But God is retraining your alarm system. He's reminding your spirit that you're no longer living in old environments. He's teaching you that reacting doesn't equal protecting, and silence doesn't equal weakness. You begin feeling the shift the first time you pause instead of explode, the first time you breathe instead of break, the first time you observe instead of assume. The pause becomes your protection. The pause becomes your spiritual filter. In that pause, you gain clarity, clarity that keeps you from creating storms inside your mind that don't exist in reality. Then God begins dealing with over-explaining. When you've spent your life trying not to disappoint people, you learn to explain every move. When you've been misunderstood before, you learn to justify your intentions. When you've been rejected, you learn to offer endless clarity to avoid being misjudged again. But God is teaching you that explanation does not equal worth. Approval does not equal identity, and validation from others does not equal confirmation from Him. Your no doesn't need a speech. Your boundaries don't need a presentation. Your decisions don't require permission. You stop explaining yourself because you realize your calling is not up for debate. When someone is determined to misunderstand you, no amount of explaining will change their mind. And you are done wasting emotional energy trying to convince people who were never meant to be spiritual witnesses to your growth. Next, God begins addressing the silent habit that drains many hearts, overthinking. Overthinking is not a thinking problem. It is a trust problem. When you've lived through heartbreak, disappointment, or chaos, your mind tries to protect you by anticipating danger, but constantly rehearsing worst. Case scenarios doesn't protect you. It exhausts you. It makes you fear moments that are harmless. It makes you sabotage peace that is already yours. It makes you live in battles that aren't happening. God is teaching you to interrupt the mental spiral. To remind yourself, I don't need to control this. I don't need to predict this. I don't need all the answers today. When trust rises, overthinking loses its grip. When faith rises, fear loses its voice. When you release outcomes, your mind finds rest. You begin to realize that peace was never something you had to earn. It was something you had to choose. Then God confronts the habit of absorbing everything. You've carried people's burdens, emotions, moods, and frustrations because you felt responsible for fixing what was never yours to fix. But absorbing is not compassion. Absorbing is emotional overload disguised as kindness. You are learning that you can care deeply without caring unnecessarily. You are learning that you can support someone without absorbing their pain. You are learning that you can listen without becoming their emotional landfill. You are learning that empathy has limits, and those limits are holy. God is teaching you how to return emotional weight that was never yours to carry. And then, perhaps most uncomfortable of all, He confronts the habit of avoiding your own emotions. Avoiding might look like staying busy so you don't have to feel. It might look like laughing off hurt. It might look like brushing things aside, but avoided emotions don't disappear. They hide, and hidden emotions grow into anger, anxiety, or burnout. God is bringing your emotions into the light not to overwhelm you, but to heal you. He doesn't bring up wounds to shame you. He brings them up so they can stop ruling your life from the shadows. You begin realizing healing is not weakness. It is strength. It is courage. It is the refusal to continue bleeding from unaddressed places. There is also the habit of trying to be the strong one at all times, the one who never cracks, the one who holds everything together, the one who handles crises without flinching. But strength is not the absence of vulnerability. Strength is allowing yourself to feel, to rest, to breathe, to process. True strength knows when to stand tall and when to fall at the feet of God and say, I need you. God is breaking the belief that asking for help is weakness, asking for help is wisdom, asking for help is maturity, asking for help is holy, and with each habit you break, you begin to feel something rise within you, a new version of emotional stability. A version of you that can feel deeply without drowning, a version of you that can be honest without falling apart, a version of you that can remain grounded even when life becomes unpredictable. You don't shut down. You don't explode. You don't spiral. You respond. You breathe. You trust. You discern. You pause. You grow. This is emotional maturity. This is spiritual discipline. This is inner awakening. You begin noticing the shifts. You don't let small things break you anymore. You don't allow fear to narrate your decisions. You don't replay conversations in your head trying to fix what wasn't broken. You don't personalize moments that have nothing to do with you. You don't let yesterday's wounds write today's story. You don't hand your peace over to whoever asks for it. You're becoming someone who can walk through storms without losing identity, someone who can breathe through pressure without collapsing, someone who can experience conflict without becoming chaos. Someone who can love without losing yourself. You are not who you were. You are becoming grounded, stable, clear, stronger than life assumed, and wiser than your past believed. This version of you is the one God has been preparing all along, the version with self-control, spiritual clarity, emotional strength, and divine awareness. This is not just healing. This is transformation. Something powerful is awakening in your emotional world, and what God strengthens next will shape the way you rise into your destiny. There comes a moment in your transformation when God begins shifting you from emotional survival into emotional authority. Not the kind of authority that silences your feelings, but the kind that teaches you to lead them instead of being led by them. This is the stage where God reveals just how much strength has been quietly growing inside you, even in moments you felt the weakest. You start noticing that you're not reacting the way you used to. You're not retreating into fear the way you used to. You're not handing your peace over to circumstances the way you used to. Something inside you has stabilized. This is the stage where God shifts you from being easily shaken to being spiritually anchored. The version of you He is forming can face pressure without collapsing, uncertainty without panicking, and change without losing identity. This is emotional authority, and it is a sign that God has been preparing you for a life bigger than what the old you could handle. Emotional authority begins when you realize you are no longer controlled by external triggers. Situations that once caused you to break down now cause you to breathe deeper. Unpredictable moments that once made you spiral now push you toward prayer. Conflict that once drained you now reveals how much wisdom you carry. You are reacting from a healed place instead of a wounded one. Emotional authority is the ability to observe your feelings without obeying them. You can acknowledge sadness without sinking. You can feel fear without surrendering. You can experience frustration without lashing out. You can notice anxiety without letting it narrate your future. This does not mean you don't feel. It means your feelings no longer rule you. God is teaching you that emotional mastery is not about shutting down emotions. It's about knowing which emotions deserve influence and which ones need redirection. He is teaching you that you can have emotions without being owned by them. You can have questions without drowning in doubt. You can have concerns without surrendering your clarity. You're becoming emotionally fluent, able to translate your feelings instead of being trapped by them. As you grow into emotional authority, God also teaches you to trust the maturity He has built in you. This maturity shows up in how you pause before responding, how you reflect before reacting, and how you choose alignment over impulse. The old you lived in survival mode, quick, reactive, defensive. The evolving you moves with intention, calm, discerning, deliberate, and then something powerful happens. You begin to feel safe inside yourself. You no longer fear your own emotions. You no longer fear your own thoughts. You no longer fear being overwhelmed by your internal world. You no longer fear falling apart the way you once did. For the first time, you feel like your inner world is a place of stability instead of struggle. This internal safety allows God to stretch you into new levels of purpose, because emotional instability limits destiny, not because God withholds blessings, but because instability makes it difficult to carry the weight that purpose requires. But the version of you rising now can handle conversations that used to intimidate you. You can handle responsibilities that once scared you. You can handle relationships that require emotional maturity. You can handle opportunities that demand emotional clarity. You are not fragile anymore. Another powerful shift in this stage is that your self-worth becomes rooted in God instead of reactions from people. You stop measuring your identity by how people treat you. You stop letting someone's inconsistency make you doubt your value. You stop letting someone's silence define your significance. You stop letting external instability rewrite your internal confidence. You know who you are, you know what you carry, you know who you belong to. People can shift, but your identity stays grounded. God also begins training you in emotional discernment, teaching you to differentiate between what deserves your attention and what does not. Not every battle requires your sword. Not every opinion deserves your response. Not every misunderstanding requires correction. Some things are simply beneath the version of you God is constructing. You have learned to ask yourself, will this matter in a week? Is this worth my energy? Is this aligned with peace? Is this God's priority for me, or is it a distraction? This discipline protects you from emotional detours. Emotional authority also means learning how to hold space for yourself without shame. You no longer apologize for needing rest. You no longer hide when you feel overwhelmed. You no longer judge yourself for having limits. You no longer criticize yourself for past mistakes. You treat yourself with compassion instead of condemnation. You are becoming kinder with your own soul. This shift changes how you show up for others as well, because emotional authority doesn't mean you become distant or cold. It means you become intentional. You learn to give from overflow instead of depletion. You learn to love from a place of wisdom instead of desperation. You learn to support others without abandoning yourself. You learn to be present without being drained. People begin feeling the difference in your presence. Your calm speaks before your words do. Your clarity fills the room before your explanations do. Your peace becomes noticeable, almost magnetic, because genuine peace cannot be hidden. It naturally influences your voice, your decisions, your boundaries, and your movements. Then God begins revealing the purpose behind everything He healed inside you. Your emotional maturity was never just about surviving hard moments. It was about preparing you to carry what He's releasing next. People with wounded emotions cannot carry heavy assignments. People without discernment cannot influence wisely. People who panic easily cannot steward promises faithfully. But you have been trained quietly, strengthened gradually, refined internally, stretched spiritually, stabilized emotionally. You didn't even realize God was preparing you for influence while you were just trying to heal. But now your healed emotions have become a tool. Your clarity has become an asset. Your restraint has become a strategy. Your peace has become a weapon. Your discernment has become your protection. You are stepping into a new dimension of self-mastery, a version of you capable of leading, building, loving, creating, and influencing without collapsing under pressure, a version of you the past could not produce, the version of you God always saw. And now, as you stand on the edge of what's next, something inside you finally feels ready, not because everything around you is perfect, but because everything inside you is aligned. You are no longer scared of growth. You are no longer intimidated by change. You are no longer controlled by emotion. You are no longer held hostage by history. You are ready, prepared, grounded, and spiritually equipped.